welcome everyone. I know some of you, but not all of you. My name is Denise Larsen. I'm a professor here at the university. My area is actually counseling psychology. I am also director of research at the Hope Foundation, and I recognize some of you from the Edmonton Mennonite Center for Youth Conference, so it's really, really great to have you here. It's my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce Andrea Mattos. She's a professor at a federal university in Brazil, and Andrea and I met a couple of years ago at a conference called Narrative Matters, which was really about the stories we tell about our lives and how we learn about ourselves and the work we do as teachers. So I was giving a talk, and Andrea happened to come to that talk, and I was talking actually about professors' work lives, or certain kind of teachers' work lives, and Andrea came up to me afterwards, and she had liked the talk, so she introduced herself, and we've had the opportunity to work in a couple of ways since. We were down at a conference in Brazil that her university was sponsoring, and in fact, Jorge was there as well presenting. So it's a real pleasure to have you here. It's a pleasure to have Andrea with us, visiting from Brazil. Andrea has done research in the area of hope, as you know, and specifically taking a look at teachers or teachers who are not yet out teaching, pre-service teachers teaching English as a foreign language in Brazil, and specifically what it is that hope is for them. So it's a fascinating study that she's done, and talked to them about what keeps them connected and interested in their own work, students. So, I also wanted to mention that Andrea has done some really interesting work in the area of hope and teaching as well. She's just published this book called Narratives on Teaching and Teacher Education. Fascinating book. There's international stories from around the world in it, articles. And about a third of the book, the back third of the book, is specifically focused on the topic of hope in teaching. So that might be something that you mentioned or that you want to come and take a look at after the talk as well. So with that, Andrea, thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to your talk.
Well, I also want to thank you all for coming here after a long day, I imagine, because all teachers are always so busy, right? And I also want to thank Denise and Judy for having me here for this talk. So, as Denise said, I've been conducting some research on narratives, specifically on the topic of hope with my pre-service teachers in Brazil. And today I have this presentation for you. It's more like a presentation, but if you feel like asking questions in the middle, that's okay, no problem. I called it, it's the same title of my chapter in the book, A Tale of Hope, Pre-Service Teachers' Expectations towards the Profession. And you might think that it's a misspelling, but it's not. And I'll tell you in a minute, towards the end of the presentation, I'll tell you why I have it a tale, really misspelled, okay? So I have this big name, Andrea Machado de Almeida Mattos, but you can just say Andrea Mattos. UFMG is my university in Brazil. USP is another university where I'm really taking my PhD right now. And University of Manitoba is my host university in Canada, because I've been here since July for a 6-month research period, and I'll be going back to Brazil in December. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody that is involved gets mentioned. And I also have my email, so if you would like to contact me for some reason, I'll be happy to be in contact with you too. Okay? Okay, so I want to start with this idea that stories matter, okay? This comes from this very young novelist and storyteller from Africa. She's Nigerian. Her name is kind of awkward for Brazilians, Chimamanda Adichie, I think that's how you pronounce it. So she has this video on the danger of a single story. That's what she calls it. It's on the internet, so if you browse for the danger of a single story, you'll find it. It's a short video, about 20 minutes, and it's very, very interesting. So she tells the story of how she found her cultural voice as an African, because first she hadn't thought of herself as African, but simply Nigerian. So she goes on saying that it is sometimes problematic to know only one story of a person or a country. And if this story is not very positive, if this story is negative in any way, then you end up with a very negative picture or idea about that person or that country. So that's why she talks about the danger of a single story. And on the other hand, if you have several stories of a person or of a country, you can have a better idea of what that person really is, how that country really is. And it doesn't matter if you have a few negative stories, but if you also have some very positive ones, they're kind of balanced, right? So I want to call your attention to this piece that she has at the very end of the video. She says, stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign. I can't really pronounce this word. But stories can also be power and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of the people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. So that's what I want you to remember for this presentation, because in the end, you'll see how this goes together with the stories that I have from my participants, my pre-service teachers in Brazil, and I want to go back to this when we get there, okay? All right, so how this whole story begins. So as Denise said, I came to Canada for the first time in 2006 for the Narrative Matters conference in Wolfville in Nova Scotia. And there I met her. I went to her presentation just by chance. And I found out about Work on Hope through her presentation. I got to learn about the Hope Foundation. You all have folders of the Hope Foundation, but I have here the website. It's a wonderful place to visit and read some stories of hope. And I'm sure you can find interesting material there. So then me and Denise, we started this conversation on hope across the two countries. And we met in Brazil in 2007 for our first presentation together. And we also had Eli, who was at that time her postdoc fellow, research fellow here at the University of Manitoba. And coincidentally, now Eli is teaching at the university, she was here at the University of Alberta, and now she's at the University of Manitoba. So it kind of, things go together. I don't know why, right? So we were together in this conference in Brazil, and then I presented some work on hope in another conference in Brazil too, in Salvador. And this conference was a conference on Canadian studies, so there were lots and lots of people interested in anything that is going on in Canada. So I had quite a lot of people in my session. And then I came to Canada for the second time, and me, Judy, and two other colleagues, Eli again was one of them. We went to Narrative Matters in 2008 together, and it was great again. So this is how I started my own story of hope as a hope researcher. Okay, so from the very first time that I got to know about hope research, I was very interested in it, and I thought it very much applied to the kind of work that we were doing in Brazil with pre-service teachers, and the way these pre-service teachers were facing their future profession. And I decided that I also wanted to start studying hope and researching hope in that, you know, go in that direction. So I started reading about hope, and I found out that hope is not really a new topic. There are some studies on hope that date back to the 1960s, so I cited 2 of them, but there is at least one other that I know of that is back there in the 1960s. So there is this Images of Hope, Imagination as Healer of the Hopeless, and also the Psychology of Hope. I went to the HopeLit database that the Hope Foundation has sponsored together with the University of Alberta, and I found out that there are researchers and studies on hope all over the world. In many countries. I just listed a few here that I thought were kind of leading countries by the number of studies that they had listed in the HopeLit database. There was nothing from Brazil. And I was surprised that there were all those studies on hope, and that Brazil didn't even know about that. So I went on researching, and then next step was going through what kind of research was there in which areas. So I found that there were studies on hope on several areas. These are again just the main areas: psychology, philosophy, medical care, and nursing seem to be the 2 areas that are leading research on hope. There was also something in the area of sociology and education, which is basically my area. But there was nothing on EFL or English as a foreign language area, right? By the way, I wonder if you understand the difference between English as a second language and English as a foreign language, because I understand that you are second language teachers, but in Brazil, English is really a foreign language. We have virtually no English speakers there, so we hardly have the chance to speak English at all outside the classroom. So it's really a foreign language for us. So there was nothing on hope in the area of foreign language teaching. So I started researching in terms of trying to understand what hope was. So these are some characteristics and features of hope. So hope is a common human experience, it seems. Everybody has it or has had it some time in their lives, but it is uniquely lived, experienced, or whatever it is that you feel when you have hope. It's different for each person, okay? So research also shows that hope is positively linked to health. It promotes healing, facilitates coping processes like recovering from illness, and enhances the general quality of life. So if you have hope, you certainly are a better person, right? Hope is action-oriented. So if you have hope for something, you want to take action so that something happens in the direction of your hopes. Okay, I also found some studies that make a difference between hoping and wishing, and hoping and optimism. So hoping and wishing would be that Turner says that our desires are hope if they are realistic, and wishes if they are unrealistic. And hope and optimism is basically the same difference. Hope is realistic and it does not deny the circumstance. There is also research on hope and hopelessness, and you see that my own research has a bit of hopelessness idea in it. Okay, so some definitions, because as a teacher I like definitions. So this is one that I like very much. It says hope is a multidimensional, dynamic life force characterized by a confident yet uncertain expectation of achieving a future good which to the hoping person is realistically possible and personally significant. So it's quite a long definition, but you have the main characteristics of hope in it. So it's multidimensional, it's dynamic, the person is confident about the hopes that they have, although sometimes they may be facing uncertain situations. It is about the future, okay? It is realistic, so hope is always related to reality in a certain way, and it's personally significant. So my hope may be completely different from your hopes, and if my hope is not significant for you, it doesn't matter. It's significant for me, so that's enough, okay? This is a shorter one, so it may be better for you to work with your students maybe. So hope is an expectation that what is desired is also possible. And here again some characteristics. So hope is futuristic, motivating, self-sustaining, pervasive, and necessary to life. So nobody can really live without hope. But so when I first started thinking about hope and researching hope, I also had this question in mind. Why hope? Why would hope be a topic for research if it's so subjective, so personal, and research sometimes is so objective, so scientific, right? So how come we could have research on hope? So I kind of thought that we live in dark times, right? Some researchers, some philosophers think of that, and it seems to be also the general, the common sense that we are going through very hard times. So in the world, we hear of war sometimes, maybe most of the times. If you turn on the TV, you will hear about inequalities, starvation in some areas of the world, in Brazil sometimes, disease, energy crisis, all kinds of other crises that may affect our worlds nowadays, environmental disasters. In Brazil, we don't have wars. We haven't had for some time, but we do have what we call urban wars, because there's a lot of violence on our cities, drug traffic, child abuse, women abuse, things like that. We also have many problems, economic problems, educational problems. We have a lot. So it seems that hope would help in that context. And in the teaching profession too, this may be different from what you find here in Canada, but in Brazil, teachers usually work very long hours. Students in Brazil go to school either in the morning or in the afternoon, and some of them go to school in the evening if they work all day. So if you go to school in the morning, you go from 7 to 12 o'clock, and then if you go in the afternoon, you go from 1 to 5:30 maybe, and in the evening it's about 7 to 10:30. So if you are a teacher and you need money, you might be teaching the whole day. You go to one school in the morning, another school in the afternoon, and a third school maybe in the evening. So that's just exhausting. And many of these teachers do get very low salaries. they are demotivated because they are working so much, because they face so many difficulties in their professions. They have terrible conditions. They don't have any equipment. Something like this would be, unthinkable for them, especially in public schools. In private schools we might have that, but certainly not in public schools. So we need hope in many situations in our lives, right? So that's how I thought that hope is really important and it should be researched, right? So I designed this research based on many studies that I was reading about. It is a qualitative research, so there is no statistics in it. And basically what I found was what Turner found in 2005. So she had like 4 horizons of hope. 2 of them were hope as a driving force and hope as connecting and being connected to people. That's basically what I found in my research too. I'll talk about that in a minute. The context of my research was, as I said, my EFL language course at the University of Minas Gerais, the Federal University of Minas Gerais. It was a teacher education course. So this group of teachers was preparing to become teachers of English, but many of them were already teachers. We have what we call language institutes. So students, children and adults too, they can go to these institutes to learn any language that is available, that the institute offers. Most of the institutes offer English. Some of them offer French, Italian, sometimes Chinese, but most of them are English language institutes. So they are not really schools. So if you don't have a teaching degree, you can still teach there because it's not required. So many people go abroad for international programs. They stay for a year in the US or Canada or England, Australia. Any of these English-speaking countries, they go back to Brazil. They can be teachers at these institutes. So they are these students in my class. Some of them were already teachers. Some of them were quite experienced teachers in language institutes, but they were still preparing to get their degree in teaching. Right? I had 18 participants for this research. I had more students in class, but not all of them allowed me to use their stories. And the processes that we used were like course discussions on different texts that we were using for the theory of the teacher development course. And also the participants' narratives. And the narratives are where the stories of hope come from, right? So I had this set of reflective questions that Denise was kind enough to offer me from her research. So I reworded the questions so that they would fit my context. So it goes like, what stories from your life experience give you hope for being a teacher? What experiences at the university help you have hope for being a teacher? What experiences support your hopes for teaching? And what experiences threaten your hope? Thinking about the topics that were discussed during the semester. What do you hope that being a teacher would mean to you and to your future students? Because many of them had students already, but not all of them. And in face of all the problems that our country is going through nowadays, and also thinking about the problems specifically related to the teaching profession, how do you hope to contribute to your profession? So all these questions had to do with the discussions that we had in class, but they were also meant to collect the participants' stories on hope and expectation. Okay, so what I found were some hope stories related to their life or to their university experiences, so stories that would give them hope for being teachers. I also found those two meanings of hope, hope as a driving force and hope as connecting and being connected to people. They also mention many threats to their hope of being good teachers in Brazil. And they mentioned this that was absolutely unexpected. So their threats turning into more hope for becoming better teachers. So I want to share with you some of these hope stories. So one goes like, I had never thought of teaching until I started studying English in an English institute, and later I was invited to become a tutor at the language institute I studied. This opportunity made me see that teaching was a great area in which you share experiences and deal with human beings in the most different ways. You teach, but you also learn a lot. Another story of hope is this one. In my life as an English teacher, so this teacher was really a very experienced one. I have had countless experiences that have given me hope for being a teacher. When you teach beginners that do not know the verb to be, and that's like every teacher's first class, right? And at the end of the first class, you can see the glow in their eyes because they can say, my name is, or my teacher is. There's not a better sensation. And that sensation of accomplishment comes every time you see a student leave your class knowing more about the language than he did when the class began. So this is very, very much what teachers do, right? But it's a hope story. It brings hope to all of us when we hear that. Hope as connecting and being connected. So here I'm starting with the pieces of the stories that bring these two different meanings of hope. So the first one says, I really enjoy being a teacher and I love the relationship I have with my students. They certainly contribute a lot in giving me hopes to continue with this job. So for this meaning of hope, connecting and being connected, what they really meant was connecting with their students, because those were the people they were in touch with. Another teacher says, what gives me hope to go on teaching is the relationship I have with my students. Their caress with me, to see them learning and to see that they are satisfied with their learning process. And the last one goes, what supports my hopes for teaching is knowing that I can help someone to learn. So all these stories relate to the relationship that the teacher builds with their students. The other meaning, hope as a driving force, goes like, one of the teachers says, teachers must believe that we can do something for improving the teaching profession in our country. So their hopes is that they can have a better future as teachers, even though now they know that the situation is not good, but they hope for a better situation in the future, right? So the second, this is the same one. You see the initials. So it's the same teachers, and it goes, of course there are bad things too, but I am hopeful. I believe that there is always something that we can do. So the hope that is put there really helps them find something that they can do for their students and to improve the situation of the teaching profession in Brazil. And the last one, it is hard to make changes in our country, but we have to believe that it is possible to do something more and to turn our work and our classes more attractive and more respectable among the students. So again, a bit of this connection with the students, but also the idea of doing something for the future. So here are two stories of threats to hope. The first goes, teaching is becoming something very difficult in our country. I wouldn't say becoming, it has been very difficult for quite a while, but this teacher says it's becoming something very difficult in our country. Not only because the students do not want to study hard or because of behavior problems in the classroom, because that may be normal. Politically speaking, teaching is something really hard to do nowadays. The salary is not good, and teachers most of the times have to work long hours to make some money. Besides, we are not respected as we would like to be, especially the foreign language teachers. So they have this very clear idea of what it means to be a teacher in Brazil. And so many other professions get a lot more credit than teachers. So we teachers are always kind of, when people say, what do you do? When you say, I'm a teacher. It's just like you saying, I'm only a teacher, right? That's not nice to say about yourself. And you have this feeling, even the teachers, even those that are very committed to the profession, they know that the teaching profession is not very valued in Brazil, unfortunately.
Cause that kind of thinking?
Sorry?
How did that kind of thinking come about?
Well, it's just about the whole situation of having a low salary and not being able to support your family with the money that you get from what you do.
So why is it low salary? Like, society doesn't think...
It's a vicious cycle, right? Yeah, that's it. So because it's not important, it's not valued, they get low salaries and it goes on like that. Okay. Yeah.
That might speak to your question too.
Yeah, because we have this law that says that 12% of the budget has to go into education, but we also have all kinds of minor laws that allow the government not to put so much money into education. So governments keep investing in other areas like technology, health, what do you say, roads, transportation, things that when election comes they can show, oh, I've done this and that, and they have pictures of everything they've done through the 4 years that the government has been in charge, right? So they can be elected again. And 12% is already very little in terms of how much would be enough for education to be good in any country, right?
Do many students graduate from grade 12 in Brazil, or they drop out?
There is a lot of dropout, but many of them make it through. So I was thinking that these ones that go through, there must be some hope, right? Because they keep going to school, and the teachers too, they keep teaching, they keep in the profession. So there must be some hope, really.
Just a question following, I guess, from Miranda's. Is it a female-dominated profession, the way
Yes.
ESL is?
Yes, it is. Yes, yeah.
Do you think that has any correlation to?
It might be. It might be because yes. So in a family, it seems that it's always the male that makes more money for the family. So it's okay for a mother to be a teacher. So that goes back into the idea of not being a valued profession, right? Yeah, you're right. So the other story of threats to hope goes like, we live in a country which does not invest in education. So just what I was talking about. Being a teacher in such a place is not easy. Teachers are not valued, but more serious yet is the fact that teachers themselves do not value their profession and their work. So many teachers kind of say, oh, I'm just here because that's what I can do right now, but once I have something else, I'll have another profession because this one is not good, right? So these participants also talked, as I said, about their threats turning into more hope for their future. So this teacher says, the fact that we have a problematic situation in Brazil in relation to the value that the teacher profession receives only makes me feel more determined in doing my best in order to change the situation. I hope always to improve my teaching and then show to the society the importance of teachers in the process of changing the precarious condition of Brazilian education. I really believe things can be changed. So this is one example that although this teacher is aware that there are lots of threats to her hopes of being a teacher, she wants to make that more hopeful for the future. Okay, so there are a few remarks that I would like to make because what happened was that I first started working with hope, but then I had to stop and start my PhD. And my PhD is not about hope, unfortunately, but I want to go back to that. So this was what I could find out from this readings and studies on hope that I was in touch with. So talking about hope helps to foster hope. So if you keep bringing the idea of hope to classrooms and to meetings, maybe to the cafeteria, it seems to bring more hope to everybody involved. I also found out from the very beginning that the interest on hope was growing all over the world, but in Brazil, people and researchers seem not to be aware of it. So I thought of some future steps that I could take to make hope visible. So I went to some conferences presenting my work on hope, and I also published these 3 different articles on hope. One of them is in this book that Denise mentioned, and 2 of them are in English, only the last one is in Portuguese, so if you're interested, I'll be happy to share them with you. And I'm also trying another possibility with these same hope stories. So I'm trying to make it more linguistic focused. So I'm using the same hope stories and analyzing them using discourse analysis. So this is, I'm doing this together with another professor. And what we are trying to do is trying to analyze these stories in terms of speech acts of emotion. And we already have one presentation that we did on that, and it was quite good. We got very positive feedback from the audience. And we are also trying to write a paper in English so that we can get published abroad and people really get to know about it. Another future possibility is this idea of the transformative cycle of hope. So this is Andrea Santana. Just a coincidence that we have the same first name, but she is in fact our first MA student, MA candidate working on hope in my university. So she is working with the idea that if teachers are hopeful, they have good expectations for a successful teaching process. They are more committed to their work and to their students, so that facilitates the learning process. Students get more hopeful too, so the students have good expectations of a successful learning process. They involve more effort in their own learning, and that makes the teaching process easier and then it all starts over again. So she's kind of just started, but she's doing really well with this idea. Okay, but we also have some challenges in this line of research. So the first one is what they've been calling at the Hope Foundation, hope language. So that idea that if you keep using the language of hope, you'll bring more hope to any situation that you are in. So in Portuguese, we have a problem because the word to hope, the verb to hope in English is different. In Portuguese, it also means to wait. So it seems that in English, it's much more active to say, I hope that, and in Portuguese, when you say the same thing, it kind of means, I wait that something will happen, right? So it's not so active, it's kind of passive. So we have this problem right now, and what I've been doing, I've been presenting only in English so that I avoid using the word in Portuguese. But Andrea, this first researcher on hope that we have there, she's doing a better job. Oh, I have an example here. So if we say, I hope, and I wait, it's the same word in Portuguese. Eu espero, eu espero. Okay, so if you say, I hope we'll meet again, or I hope it stops raining, or whatever you say, it's the same word. And I'll wait for you here. In Portuguese, it is going to be just the same, okay? So you never know what you really mean, if you want to be hopeful, if you just want to wait. Right? So Andrea, what she's doing, instead of using the verb to wait in Portuguese, she's using having a hopeful attitude. So she really found a nice way to go around the problem. Okay, another challenge, as I mentioned, I'm doing my PhD right now. And my PhD is not on hope, it's on critical literacy. But I'm very involved in this whole idea of hope and using narratives and stories of hope. So what I want to do for the future when I finish my PhD next year, hopefully, I want to possibly put everything together in one big project, a big research project. So having critical literacy, narratives and stories, and hope. So one thing that I right now think that can be the link in this project is researching identities, because identities is a topic that has been around for some time, and many researchers research identities through narratives. Our identity, and if you watch the video by Chimamanda Adichie, she says that our lives is made of stories. So our identities is also made of so many stories that we go through since we are born. So identities seems to be, for me, the link between these two elements, narratives and critical literacy, because identities can also be researched or can be looked at from a critical perspective. So, critical literacy, I don't know, you probably know that because in Canada, as far as I know, you've been using critical literacy too. So literacy, first of all, would be the result of the action of learning or teaching to read and write, right? So this is a researcher from Brazil. She says, the state or condition that is acquired by a social group or an individual as a consequence of learning the written language. But critical literacy is not only that, it's a step forward. So critical literacy allows the reader to assume a more active role in the reader-writer relationship. So basically it starts with the idea of the written language, but now it has expanded and you can use oral language too, and multimodal language, in fact. And to achieve deeper levels of understanding from a critical perspective that questions, examines, and disputes the power relations that exist between readers and authors. So critical literacy is basically about power relations. So another definition here, Bonnie Norton is a Canadian researcher. She's a professor at British Columbia, University of British Columbia. So she says literacy is not only a skill to be learned, but a practice that is socially constructed and locally negotiated. Educators who are interested in critical literacy are interested in written text or any kind of text, as I said, any representation of meaning as a site of struggle, negotiation, and change. So when you look at narratives and identities from a critical perspective, and you recognize all the relations of power involved in the stories, you kind of want to put hope in. So yesterday when we started talking, it started to make sense to me how to put all these elements together. So identity seems to be the linking or the bond for all these elements, and that's one thing that I certainly want to do for the future. Okay, so some final thoughts that I want to share with you. I see that some of you are tired already. So this also is one of the stories from my participants. So this teacher says, if we have not been achieving our goals, we need to keep the seeds of hope in our minds and hearts. Things don't change so fast. It is important to struggle against injustice that is threatening our desire to teach by giving our best to our students. Education now will guarantee the future of our country. We can't give up. So in this piece, I think this teacher puts on so much on this hope idea. So it's aimed at the future, right? She says it. Education now will guarantee the future. It's about connecting and being connected to people, because she says giving our best to our students. It's about struggling against whatever is threatening our hopes to teach or to become better teachers in the future. And it's also about injustice. So it goes back to the idea of how critical literacy can go with hope stories and hope language, right? So I want to finish with this other quote from this Argentinian poet, Jorge Luis Borges. He's quite famous. If you Google his name, you'll certainly find something in English that he's written and somebody will have translated. So he says, the future never becomes completely present without rehearsing first. And this rehearsal is hope. Thank you very much for coming. Okay. Do you have questions? Yeah?
What about the tail?
Oh, sorry, I completely forgot about that. Yes. Well, so the tale, well, first it's a pun with the words tale and tale as a story, right? So these are tales that the teachers tell about their life's experiences, but because they talk so much about the threats that they find for their hopes, they really have very tiny hopes for becoming a teacher or for becoming better teachers in the future. They know the situation in Brazil very clear. They have that in their minds. So although they are hopeful, these hopes that they have are in fact very small, right, in terms of the complicated situation that we have. So that's how the tail thing goes in, right, because tails are usually small, thin, right? Okay. And I also wanted to make the link with the idea of not having a single story. So in terms of the stories of hope, if you have several stories, some of them may be negative, but others may be quite good, very positive. So you have a more balanced hope for the future, right? And also how these stories can empower teachers to go on seeking better stories, better futures, right?
Andrea, the stories that we read from here, from your participants, did those participants give you the stories in English or in Portuguese?
In English, yes, because they are university students. Their major is in English. All the classes that they take should be in English. They not always are, but they should be, unfortunately. And they should be speaking in English and listening to English all the time in the classroom. So that goes with the objective of improving their language skills, because that's the only chance they have for practicing their English. So they do everything in English. I edited some of them, not all of them, because some teachers are really, really good in English. So I didn't have to edit all of them, but I edit a few of them so that you wouldn't have problems understanding. Like that piece that you called my attention to when we were in Toronto, that one of the teachers says that having caress for my students. So yeah. So Judy called my attention that to the fact that this word in English may have sexual connotations, but we do have the same word in Portuguese, just with a different ending. So the teacher used it, obviously, in the Portuguese meaning. And I just kept it there because it made sense for me as a Portuguese speaker. And I know what they're talking about. And maybe this gives me another opportunity to talk about the differences between the two languages. But she doesn't mean anything like that. I mean, like the meaning in English. She simply means caring for her students and you know, trying to give her best to them in their classes, just that, right?
I would be so interested in, I didn't know that about the word hope in Portuguese, and I wonder what those stories would come out like in Portuguese with that waiting piece. It just seems that there's more opportunity for hopeful stories when they do it in English because of the...
Yeah, well, that's also what I thought. That's one of the reasons I wanted it to be in English, because if I thought it would be just the same, I could have asked some of the students in class to meet me in my office and we would have like conversations in Portuguese. It would have been easier for them, maybe, at least for some of them, to speak in Portuguese. So I had these stories written. I asked them to write their stories. This was like their final assignment for the course. So I had other questions that involved things from the literature that we had read during the course, and I told them that they could choose which questions they wanted to answer. Many of them wanted to answer the hope questions, so I was happy with that. But the idea of writing the stories was also because I knew that many students in the class would have problems speaking, telling the stories orally in English. So it helped them to have them written, they could revise. So in Portuguese, I don't think it would be the same. So what Andrea is doing, actually, we have this other professor in our university that already works with narratives from EFL learners. She's been working with that for a long time. So she has a database of stories on her website. So Andrea got some of those stories. They are all in Portuguese. And she is analyzing the hope stories, in the hope pieces in those stories. So I haven't had a chance to read her partial results yet, but let's see how it comes out. So she'll probably finish next year, so we can have an idea of how those stories come out in Portuguese.
That's an interesting point about this different usage of this word. There must be other ways in Portuguese to express the idea of
right.
without this one verb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what she's doing.
And that's how they would express it.
Yes, so when she is doing presentations in Portuguese, she seems to like, she has a very good English too. Judy knows that, Denise too, they've met her. She can speak pretty good English, but she likes to speak in Portuguese in conferences. Maybe it's because she's a newcomer as a researcher, so she's kind of more confident if she's speaking in Portuguese. So what she's doing is trying to express the idea of to hope as a verb in different ways, like having a hopeful attitude, being hopeful instead of using the verb to hope, right? So that's what she's been doing, and she's doing really great.
Obviously the study of hope is very important, but I'm wondering where you feel your research how it will impact the community in Brazil or the university area, or where is this study going to help the situation in Brazil, or do you see it being able to do that?
Well, we have this course for public school teachers. It's not the undergraduate course at the university that these students were involved in. It's another course. So we meet twice during the week, once on Friday afternoons and then again on Saturday mornings, and it's only for public school teachers. They come to the course, they don't pay any fees for that, and we as university teachers, we also don't get any extra money. We volunteer for that. So what we do is we use the context to collect data for our several researches. But I see my research on hope in a way being able to impact these teachers that come to this course.
So in order to give the teachers a
sense,
venue to talk and
yes, to share their stories of hope.
Go back to the class,
right.
And feel better about.
Right, exactly, right, yeah. And also in terms of research, because I am a university teacher, so we as university teachers, we have this double role as researchers too. Some university teachers don't really like it, but I really enjoy being a researcher and a professor at the university, so I'm kind of happy with what I'm doing. And that adds to hope, right? So I want to keep on researching and writing about hope research and getting published about that, so that I can make research on hope visible for other researchers too. right? So it would impact in another way, and maybe some of these researchers that may become interested in hope may have their own venues for, trying to change the situation, right? Yeah. Yeah. Well.
Andrea, would it be all right if I said a couple of things about hope and the use of language?
Sure, you're most welcome.
The questions you're asking are, I might just move over here because I know my head is in the middle of the camera there.
Do you want to use the mic, Denise?
No, that's
Okay.
fine. That's fine. No. I just want to make a couple comments. Thanks. The questions that we were talking about around the use of language in hope, like this piece around, and I have no second languages in my own personal repertoire, but what I do know is that we've had the chance to start thinking about, like, what does hope mean in other cultures and languages. I think Andrea raises a good point about that, and you've asked some really interesting questions, because hope means different things in English even. So it's a verb sometimes, it's a noun sometimes, it's a, we use the word hopefully, or am I a hopeful person? So we use it in many different ways, and sometimes it's very active, other times we talk about it's like a possession, right? I have hope or I don't have hope, that kind of thing. And so we see now these studies happening in other countries, and I'd be so curious from your own experiences of teaching in the classroom and working with newcomers to Canada, and like what that means to come to Canada, and the kind of the hopes that might draw a person to Canada, and even the hope in the classroom and so forth. And I mean, there's so many ways in which hope might be involved in that experience for newcomers, and picking up the language. When we think about their own languages that they're coming with, and the ways in which hope might or might not appear in their newcomer or their original languages. There's a couple studies that come to mind. One of them is a study done by Sophie Johanni or Sophie Parkins. Would any of you happen to know her?
I would not
Yeah.
Sophie. She used to be Sophie Parkins, and she had long braids, extensions, and she worked in the old building. At the end of the hall, her office was right by the photocopiers. She's one of the counselors, one of our psychologists.
I knew she had something to do with the Edmonton Mennonite Center, but I wasn't sure what. And she did research with some of the youth who were coming to the center, and did some programming with them, actually talking to them. And my understanding is they came from many different countries, and so their first languages was a real variety. And so they had their conversations about hope in English. And part of the research, there are many pieces to it, but one that sort of stands out in my mind when I think about it is there have been some, I think, concern about talking about hope with the kids, because they were most of them refugee children who come from really, really, really difficult circumstances in their home countries, and they've seen a lot of awful things. So, I know Sophie was cautious and careful about how she introduced ideas, and was sensitive with the kids around that. The concern was that they'd seen so many awful things they wouldn't have anything to say about hope, which is a very understandable concern. As she started to work with them, they made quilt blocks of stories from home and what was hopeful for them, and they did a variety of other kind of art projects, and she spoke to them about their art projects. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Like, I remember one quilt block that one of the kids in her group made, which had a UN food truck on it. And he said that was a hopeful image for him, is to remember that UN food truck coming into their refugee camp. And they had many others, like relationships they had with their grandparents who they were now separated from, but they still took hope from those relationships, and many other examples that the kids had. So Sophie wrote up all these different sources of hope that the kids were able to talk about. Connections with nature, all of these kinds of things. And one of the things she mentioned, she went to talk to the people who I understand were cultural brokers and the parents and so forth, who had been very concerned for the children about, not pushing them when life had been difficult. And she said it was so fascinating because many of these parents and cultural brokers took great hope in the fact of learning that their children actually had sources of hope in their life. They hadn't realized that, right? So it's so interesting that sometimes in places where you don't expect that hope can be found, these children were actually appeared to be really well capable of naming that. They weren't saying that life hadn't been difficult, but they were saying it was hope too. Hope too, yeah. So, and then E. Lee, whose picture you saw up here, she did research with newcomer. They were actually youth who came to Canada to learn English from China. And this was an eye-opener to me. I did a little bit of this research with her. You'll know more about this than I do. But these young people come as young as 14, and they stay with homestay families in Canada, and they go like to high school here. And so their English is very minimal, I think, when they come often. And they go to the high schools here in the hopes of learning English and improving their possibilities for like a good future as adults, right? Only the transition is so very difficult for them. Sometimes the homestay family situation is a really good one, sometimes not so much. So E. Lee decided to interview these kids really about this experience, like what this was like for them and where the hope was for them. And as it happens, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert in Chinese, but as it happens, the word that translated in Chinese for hope is really about goals. I hope for, right? That's the type of language that fits with hope in Chinese. So we thought it was going to be all talking about goals and whether you could meet your goals or not meet your goals and that. And part of it was, but part of it, as she kept talking with the kids, because she did her interviews in Chinese, they started saying, well, but a lot of the other things that gave them hope was like their relationship with their parents. They talked to them on the phone every day. Or one of the girls said, I sit with my friends, and her Chinese friends, and they tell stories to each other about good futures, and they make up stories about what their futures could be, and they make up all kinds of stories. And that was very hopeful for this one student. So even though at first it sounded like the translation would be only about goals, it ended up being about relationships. It ended up being about how important their teacher was, both helping in learning, but also in letting them know that they were worth paying attention to and that they believed in them, right? Which is a little bit bigger than goals, to say I believe in you. So it's made me really curious about how translation works, because somehow the things we expected from the translation, they were there in the talk with the kids. But some of the part that looked more like the way we think of hope in English was there too, even though all the interviews were in Chinese. So I would just be so curious about, I mean, you're the ones doing the work where you actually interact with newcomers and...
There was this tweak for you?
Oh yeah. No, I'm just sitting here thinking, you know, as you're talking about youth and the hope that youth has, and it focuses on this youth. You know, we're dealing with teaching adults and parents of the youth. And many of the parents, when they first start out in our system, they're saying, well, you know, we came here because it's a better place for our children.
Yeah.
So they're thinking about the hope for their children, what their children will achieve, not for themselves.
Yeah.
But over time, as they're here longer and experience more in our classrooms, and we talk about themselves and get them to think about themselves versus their children,
Yeah.
which is very difficult for them to do. They actually, I think, regain their own hope for their own being,
Yes.
which is a very powerful thing to watch.
Yeah.
And I've just experienced that quite recently in my classroom this session, actually, where I have one lady who's actually decided just recently that I actually can have a life here too, and I'm actually going to go, I'm going to get my education, I'm going to go back, but it was all about her children. And she was just going to she was going to learn the language just so she could, you know, do her thing. But all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute here. So it's very cool to watch the adults themselves also become hopeful in their own being versus doing something good for their family.
Right.
And it's hard to get them to think about themselves.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
I'll bet. Almost like their hope is lived through their children.
That's
at
correct.
first. Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important.
Karen just did a project with the class that I just thought was such a beautiful collection of narrative, hope, and identity.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just tell
Well,
the
this was
brief
an art.
about it.
Yeah, it stems from an art project with all of our Lake students. All the teachers did a project. And so I decided that we would talk about then, now, and the future. And I used it through Play-Doh. So I asked them to create a scene that they remember then. And it was always, in the past, was always a very happy scene. And then the present ended up being a very confusing scene.
Lots of questions.
Lots of question marks and uncertainty.
Yeah.
And then the third was usually a bit more hopeful, the hope came in the future.
Yeah.
But they also had to speak about their project, and so it was quite powerful. And I had a couple of students actually, when I asked them to do this, they didn't want to do it. They just said, I'm not doing this. And I say, well, what's stopping you from doing it? Or it's okay if you don't want to do it, but I'm interested in knowing what's stuff. I don't want to think about it.
Oh.
Because it maybe looked a little bit hopeless.
Yes.
And it was difficult. Even to go back to the past, it felt uncomfortable to go back to a happier time because I don't want to be sad that I'm missing that. So there was
They feel the loss.
there was
of
a lot of emotion expressed. But in the
Yeah.
end, they all did participate in it. And in the end, I think the general consensus was there is this hope. There is hope in my life. And thank you for making me think about me versus the whole kind of family. So it brought out, I started out with, well, what am I going to do? And I think I'll do this. But it came with such power in the end. I had no idea it would go there. So it wasn't like I was looking for that or I was expecting that at all. It just was very powerful.
I think when they are in their own countries, they have their own identity.
Absolutely.
But here, in a few years, like when you are new here, you lose completely. You lose trust in yourself.
Yes.
I have experienced. But you are nothing. You are zero. But again, then you have to build your life. You find somebody like Karen or Judy, like who gives you hope and keeps you going. I think so. That's why they didn't want to do anything.
Well, and I think also at the present time, because they were all talking about their experiences while other people were working on their Play-Doh, listening to each other, and we watched it again and listened again, they realized that they're not alone in that thought. And I think that there's this perspective that I'm in this classroom and somebody seems to be better at English than me and they seem to be further along and somebody has a job and they really feel that they're alone. But when they hear all of them really saying, not so sure what's going to happen here, I feel pretty confused, I feel lonely, I feel this and that. And they kind of go, really? Because you seem to have it together. And it's all kind of, no, not really. We're all kind of in the same boat, is what they figured out. And so their identity was, do you want to say it? Gave them credibility that it's okay to be in this spot right now, and most of us are, where they feel alone, so they don't want to talk to them. Yeah, but you're right. It does have a lot to do with identifying yourself and feeling a part of something.
Any other questions or comments, thoughts, things, wonders? I want to thank all of you for the opportunity for this really lovely discussion and to hear about some of your work as well. And Andrea, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to learn about, I think, someone at the Hope Foundation said you're a pioneer. Taking this notion of hope and really breaking new ground, thinking about what does this mean in the Brazilian teaching context, and really exploring what it means in language, and just experimenting, I think, to see what happens when you begin to talk about hope in your classroom, and have students start to become intentional in naming that. And like you said, it's certainly been my experience that when You experiment, you learn as you go, and there are also ways in which it seems to, when we hear one another's hope stories, it actually supports that story, bigger story of hope, and making changes in ways that we would like to see them.
Yeah, well, there is also this idea that every country or every culture main stories like Africans are poor, people from the Middle East have lots of wars. So these are stories that kind of picture a country or an area in the world, and they're called main stories of a certain culture. But we can always try to change those stories and have more stories, because there is the danger of having a single story. So that's one thing that I really believe that hope is capable of doing, you know, having a different story of ourselves and of anybody else. Right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming.